want the best for them. No standing water means clean, good tasting, algae-free, mosquito-free, and virus-free water. No risk of electric shock, no risk of fire from faulty wiring. Cool water in the summer, warm water in the winter. Water delivered fresh from the water supply at 50 degrees year-round. Drinking Post water.
The rural American lifestyle. It's how we work, and it's how we play. It's how we learn and how we enjoy the finer things in life. How we take care of our animals and tend to the land. It's a way of life. Has been for hundreds of years. Now there's a whole new way for rural America to watch.
Hey,
TV.
we at Speaking of Horses are here at the National Equestrian Trails Conference in Raleigh, North Carolina, and we want to catch up with one of our featured speakers, Mr. Ken Haddad from the Equine Land Conservation Resource. Let's watch.
A little different perspective on. I thought all the discussions we've had are just phenomenal. So it's a privilege to be able to hear all the issues kind of on a nationwide scale that are facing a lot of our trails programs. So I did want to point out one thing. That panther that was discussed in Florida up where it shouldn't be, and it made it across 95, well, it crossed 95 a few times too many. So it's in panther heaven now. But that's part of expanding natural resources in areas that are pretty much human oriented. So, let's see if I can do this. Why me? And this is going to not seem real important right now, but hopefully it will give you some insight as to some of my thoughts that are going to come forward. First of all, I'm a marine biologist. I don't think that's pertinent, but it actually will show up. I do have horses. In fact, I built a horse barn in 2001 and got a horse trailer in 2004. I rode my first horse in 2006, so I'm a planner, as you can tell. I actually got a horse in 2007, and then by 2009 had 4 horses. So you can see I'm relatively new to it, but I've planned it out and jumped in with all 4 feet. It was mentioned I was executive director of the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. I did this for 8 years. I learned an awful lot that's pertinent to our community, our horse community. Managed millions of acres of state, federal, and private lands for fish and wildlife specifically. I'm currently a consultant to the American Sport Fishing Association. You're going to ask, why is that relevant? It's the recreational fishing industry trade organization. A lot of parallels and learning that is can be transferred into the horse community and will relate to some of the observations I'm going to give you. President of the board of the Equine Land Conservation Resource. Dot mentioned that. She's one of our board members. Jan Hancock's been involved. Mary Hansen is on our advisory board. So we're scattered throughout here. But just to make clear on my boss perspective, both Dot and I work for free. We're volunteers for ELCR, not employees. And then I do ride 3 to 5 times a week. So that's because I'm mainly retired and can do that. So I want to give you some observations that I've actually heard throughout here, and I wrote these actually last week. So I was second guessing some things here, but my observation is the horse industry, and I mean the industry, not you guys, is minimally involved in horse access and land loss issues. Why do I point this out? noted I work for the American Sport Fishing Association. They were in the same boat. This is the industry, the American Sport Fishing Association. Boat manufacturers, tackle manufacturers, Bass Pro shops are all members of that organization. They were also minimally involved as an industry in fishing issues. Well, in 2006, there was federal legislation passed that had dramatic impacts on fishing in federal waters. And that resulted in some cases up to 30% losses in industry revenue. So suddenly there was a revenue impact and the industry suddenly woke up and said, what just happened? That's why I'm hired, to try to help them sort through that. But it's relevant to the horse world because right now, at least in the land loss issue and horse access, I don't see industry, minimally. Everything I say that isn't happening, it's happening a little bit somewhere, but not enough. Horse owners are minimally involved in horse access and land loss issues. We've heard that, horse owners have to get involved. There's a caution in thinking about that. Coming from the recreational fishing side of the world, with 35 million licensed anglers, you could almost put on your hand out of those 35 million who's actually involved personally as an individual in fishing issues. And I equate it to thinking about a golfer. A golfer goes out and plays golf. It's something they love to do. It's fun. They don't get involved in maintenance of the golf course. Now, if something isn't right on, like, the green is all brown and pitted, now they're going to get angry, but they're still not going to do anything. And as much of the problems we run into in recreational fishing, I've concluded that you will have minimal success in taking somebody that is doing something as their passion and fun and try to get them involved in things that aren't fun. And a lot of that is fighting certain things. So that takes me to horse organizations, which most of you are. However, with noted exceptions, and those exceptions are mainly in this room, horse organizations are minimally involved in access and land loss issues. And why do I say this? In managing so much land in Florida, I can tell you in 8 years with over 100 public meetings on land management issues, countless regulations put forward and management plans, I never had a horse person or organization come and talk to me as the head of Fish and Wildlife in Florida. Now, that doesn't mean there wasn't some local stuff going. What it means is there's minimal involvement of the horse community. We heard that. I can verify that from a different direction. And before I was a horse person, horses weren't on my radar. So, you have to keep in mind that we've got to stay plugged in. And in many cases, we've never plugged in. And I'll relate to that in a minute. So there's a general inclination for wildlife and natural resource managers to declare horses a negative. And that's something that I'm going to dwell on a little bit later. Horses are not kept on land managers' radars typically. And I'm speaking broad brush, and I'm not just speaking trails. When I'm thinking about these kinds of things, there's eventing that takes place on public lands. There's field trials with horses that takes place on public lands. polo. There's an awful lot that takes place on public lands, and many of them are threatened. So if you think your trails or other horse venues are safe on public lands, and I think we heard last night a big issue, you're wrong. The minute you think you're safe is the minute you're going to be affected by something you don't even know is happening in many cases. So there's a lot working against public lands access at a time actually when private lands are disappearing. And I think we all understand that. So what are public lands? I'm just doing a real gross overview here, and my focus is not going to be on federal lands. It's going to be more at the state level, and my experiences are east of the Mississippi, not west of the Mississippi. Huge difference, as we heard in the panel yesterday, on perhaps whether you have issues or not. So for federal lands, the primary land managers, Department of Interior, Department of Agriculture, and one you don't think about too often is the Department of Defense. And does anybody in here ride on Department of Defense lands? Yes. So it is out there, and it's actually a vast amount of acreage that's available. So for state and local lands, I'm going to group them because every state is different on what they call what, but you can categorize those types of lands. There's recreation land. That's often what you think of as your state parks. Could be other components, but are really there for access and recreation. They're game and natural resources lands or conservation lands, which are there for access, but the management of those lands is often less oriented towards access as it is towards conservation of those lands. There's environmentally sensitive lands, which are truly sensitive. They're either rare, remnant, past lands that we're trying to preserve, or they're wetlands or something else that has a reason to be taken much stronger care of. And then there's forestry lands. And I will say, do we have forestry in here? Florida? I'll have to be careful what I say then. Because I'm going to Florida next. So I will say this, both within federal and state lands management programs, typically the forestry side of that land management is the easiest to work with from a user perspective because they're born out of use. Those lands are managed to be used for timber, typically, and so they are more in tune to seeing impacts on the land in one form or fashion. So, I'm going to take you to the state of Florida and just give you, I don't know what you can read here, but how many in here are from Florida? Okay, I got to be really careful. So, an example, and this is the state public uplands. There's roughly 5 million acres of state public uplands, and I'm qualifying the uplands. This is not including some submerged lands, which probably equals the same amount there. The governor of Florida has essentially management through its Department of Environmental Protection of about 2 million acres. The Commissioner of Agriculture, which includes forestry, has about 1 million acres in forestry for management. The Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, which you'll notice is on a separate plane here because it is its own constitutional body, and it has authority over 1.4 million acres, And then if you look at county and local, you have another 500,000 acres. So that's 5 million acres right there, which is about the size of the state of New Jersey. That is, just to give you some perspective. Anybody here from New Jersey? No.
Born there.
Yeah, okay, born there. So was I. Yeah, all right. I'm showing you this partly because, one, to impress you that there's more state lands in many states than you might think, and two, it's not typically under one management unit. Now, I think a place like Michigan, which I know there's somebody here from there, they have a lot of everything under the Department of Natural Resources. North Carolina used to have everything under their, quote, natural resources, but forestry was recently moved out of that and into agriculture. So things move around in states, you got to pay attention. It's just moving slow. So federally managed lands in Florida. Forestry, USDA, about 1.2 million acres. Department of Interior, about 2.1 million acres. And Department of Defense, over 600,000 acres. So again, you have almost 4 million acres there. Public lands in Florida, you add it all together, and is roughly the size of New Jersey and New Hampshire combined. A lot of land, you don't think about it. So how much Florida land is accessible for horses? Well, if you go to the Visit Florida website, which is kind of the Board of Tourism for Florida, the world looks different from atop a horse. Saddle up and explore the state. With millions of acres of public lands, Florida has one of the best trail systems in the United States. I don't know if that's just an outrageous claim or it's true. Maybe the Florida folks can tell me. But here it is touting Florida with millions of acres. And there's a trail system. If you look at it, however, on true access, it's really a minuscule compared to the 10 million acres out there, or 9 million acres, but it's quite adequate for today's riders. However, it's shrinking around urban areas, and in Florida, we know our urban areas are expanding rapidly again and moving out. And it's inadequate for the future. Unless we're just going to be an extreme minority in the future relative to the population. So why that's important is we get in our own world of horses, and in many cases you don't want more horses on trails you're on. You may not want more anything on the trails you're on. You just want to be on it because you enjoy getting out on your horse. That will change. It's going to change in a number of ways, and I'm going to try to talk about a few of those. So, do we need more access? We've got a lot. My experience from a whole bunch of different perspectives is absolutely. Even if you don't need it right now, if you don't think you need it, you have to act now for the future on getting access to public lands. As we heard in the bicycle presentation, which I thought was great and fits right into the thinking that should be, that our horse community should have across the board. There's more and more competition for use and user conflict on public lands. That's only going to get more. It's not going to get less, guaranteed. And that's strictly just a function of population growth. And so we have so many places now in Florida, for example, that might be a 5,000 acre piece of open land that you can ride horses on, but if you go any which direction off of that, you're going to be on a golf course, you're going to be in somebody's backyard, or you're going to be on I-95 like the Panther. So it's there, and we got to realize it. We're being outmaneuvered on public lands, the horse community. We've heard some of that this morning on talking about how the bicycle organizations seem to be a much stronger and effective organization than we see in the horse community. That's not true across the nation, but being involved in ELCR and being an organization that is there to help prevent loss of land or gain more access, we see a national perspective and a national trend that's saying we have some problems in the horse community that need to be solved. They need to be solved locally. They can't be solved nationally, most of them. So in our case, more is better. Some things to consider. I'm gonna get kind of down into land managers in a moment, and I know there's at least one land manager in here, and it's going to be different. I'm going to give you some of my general thinking about it again, but not. Every place in the U.S. is different. Every state is different. Every county is different. Every city is different on how they think about things. So take everything I say with a grain of salt. Now, we talked yesterday about access and game lands and issues in North Carolina. There's issues in Kentucky. There's various things out there. I'm going to try to explain a few of them. But some things to think about for the future. There's a trending from wildlife managers who are more user-oriented. They come through a schooling process that involves hunting, fishing, other bird watching, other kinds of activities on lands that are a little different than where they're trending to. And this is an issue within the university systems of the nation, as they're moving away from wildlife management to environmental management. I'm not saying that's bad, that's just a fact. So if you come through the school of environmental management, you're going to be much more in favor of passive use of an area. And I can tell you, horses are not considered passive use of any area. And so there's a future we have to be aware of, is that it's going to be harder and harder to gain access to public lands. I'm going to keep this at the state and local level right now. I haven't read the tea leaves on federal, but I think it's going to be true there too. In a lack of understanding, horses are considered environmentally destructive. Most of you probably run into that with trails, and that's the maintenance of those trails, and not wanting to open new trails because it's just more horse poop and more trail destruction and erosion, all the things we face. And then the realization that public lands anywhere typically are public use lands. There are very few lands that are bought or owned by a state that are extremely specific on what the uses are. So talking about multiple uses on public lands, I think we've heard this. It's been discussed several times. We can't get around it. So we're going to have to be flexible, and we're going to have to be proactive. And we're going to have to learn, how do you best design a trail? I'm not talking about a individual trail, a trail system within public lands that are designed to avoid user conflict. at the state levels primarily, probably at federal levels also, county levels, there is a tendency for the land manager to not think about the diversity of needs across a user group. They just look at access. Here's a trailhead and here's where you start. They're going to have to be educated, and that's an important part. They're not educated in their training typically, unless you are actually a planner, if you come up through the planning side of the world, but most land managers are not coming up through the planning world. They're coming up through the environmental science or wildlife biology side of the world. That's a whole different perspective. And something I've observed, and this is not through the state of Florida, this is more through ELCR, that a lot of the issues that come to us are because of user conflict and wanting the horse folks wanting exclusive use. And that becomes an issue, and it's a difficult one to deal with. I want to talk about horses versus hunting. That also came up yesterday, and I thought the panel questions really led to a lot of this. So, states, to a large extent, particularly the game and fish agencies, are there because they're funded in many cases predominantly by hunting and fishing revenues. So they are going to be oriented towards hunting and fishing. You shouldn't take that as a negative. You should take it as, well, what can I do to get horses more on the radar? But horses versus hunting, it can be solved. Many areas are large enough to separate hunting and horses. There's time and zone restrictions. There's many ways to integrate both hunting and horses, and you shouldn't think that because it's designed for hunting lands that it can't be horse accessible, and it can't be horse accessible.
When it comes to equine health and wellness, many barns are turning to Nexol. The company's cleaner is being used for cleaning out food containers, cleansing tack, spraying down bedding facilities, and more. Nexol also does great for equine wellness. Many horse owners are turning to Nexol Vet Response Wound Plus Skin Solution as their first line of defense. Vet Response Plus Wound Scare Solution can be used for a variety of hot spots, skin irritations, and the like. Bottom line, Nexol is making a difference in barns, pastures, and racetracks nationwide. King Barns, located in New Holland, Pennsylvania. If you want a great custom-built barn, you got to contact kingbarns.com. All kinds of customized barns, top-grade materials, and wonderful custom design to meet your request. Please check out King Barns today. Source Nutrition. One of the fine sponsors, Source Nutrition, micronutrients developed from the seaweed harvested off the coast of Maine, aids in digestion, helps with older horses, keeps everything moving fine in your horse's digestive tract. Check out Source Nutrition.